horrific attack on a military school in Pakistan is sending shockwaves across the globe. More than 140 people were killed, including at least 130 children, and more than 100 people were wounded, many of them seriously. The attack began mid-morning when a group of Taliban militants set off a bomb to divert attention, then scaled the walls of the Army Public School and Degree College in Peshawar. Once inside, the gunmen walked through the hallways, firing at students. It was several hours before Pakistani security officials announced they had killed all of the attackers. Throughout the day, parents frantically searched for their children at local hospitals, with many learning the worst. Of the more than 100 students killed, most were between 12 and 16 years old. The Taliban claim they specifically targeted older students to avenge recent Pakistani military operations targeting Taliban tribesmen.
The military runs a number of schools. They call them the Army Public Schools. Clearly, this was chosen because of its affiliation with the military and also because it was a soft target. There are children there.
In a tweet, a military spokesman called the attack a ghastly act of cowardice, calling the Taliban not only enemies of Pakistan, but enemies of humanity. Violence against Pakistani school children is not new, but the scale of this attack by the Taliban is unprecedented. To add more perspective to the story, I'm now joined by WGBH News contributor Charlie Sennett. He's the co-founder of Global Post and founder of the Ground Truth Project here at WGBH. And Charlie, you've been to this area of Pakistan several times. You wrote about it back in 2006 for The Globe and again in 2009 for Global Post. And I went back and listened to your reports today. And I'm thinking, it could have been today. I mean, but has it changed dramatically, the makeup of this group?
I think the Taliban has changed. I think that the Taliban is a very complex organism that's hard to understand. It straddles both sides of the border, Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's a Pashtun reality, so you have to kind of understand that the ethnic grouping are Pashtuns. They live all along that so-called tribal belt that goes across the mountains that separate Afghanistan and Pakistan. Peshawar is a very famous outpost on the Silk Road. I've been there a lot. I know this area. I know this neighborhood where this happened, and it is an old British military garrison, so you can feel the British colonial presence there. You can sense the military traditions which stem out of the British experience. And you know, I don't know that you can ever explain why did this happen or what's the thinking behind this. I mean, this is the depths of darkness that we won't try to go into and understand. But I'm sure this is a direct attack on the military. This is saying you have killed our sons, as the Taliban would see it, because you have been attacking our villages in Waziristan, and you have been cracking down on what we see as a legitimate governing tribal structure called the Taliban. And we're going to come after your sons now. And I think interesting that so many of those killed, 145 I think is the latest count, majority are gunshots to the head. 130 are children, predominantly the older children. But I mean, seeing these poor kids in their uniforms, they look like they could come out of a Catholic school in Newton, Massachusetts or something.
All right, so give me a little bit more understanding here. This is called the Taliban. They comprise about 30 different sects, as I understand it. But how do they differ, for instance,
tribes might be more accurate than sects.
Okay. How do they differ from the Afghan.
Well, first of all, the Taliban is really a movement that starts right after the Soviet invasion. It turns into a civil war. The civil war puts warlords inside Afghanistan, and it creates a refugee crisis. If you remember, the Afghans fled over the border from Afghanistan during the civil war. After the Soviets, finally, the war ends between the Soviets and the Mujahideen, and there are these vast refugee camps. Now, when I first arrived in those refugee camps in the 90s, in the late 90s, the Taliban was this sort of enlightened group that was trying to say, we are going to be different than those warlords who kill people all the time. We're going to be students. And literally, Taliban means students, and it means those who study in these madrasas. And those madrasas, going back to 1996, reporting there for the Boston Globe, I remember seeing these young kids literally chained to logs, rhythmically memorizing the Quran, cruelly treated, Dickensian level of treatment of the children of the Taliban studying in the madrasas way before 9/11. And I can't help but think of those 9 attackers who were taken out in this operation, how many of them were those kinds of kids who grow up inside these madrasas with this perverse and dark theology that everyone who is Muslim would tell you has nothing to do with Islam.
But that's what everybody will say. Wait a minute, they're all Muslim. No one can understand that.
Yeah. I think, look, again, this is a horrific ending to a horrific year in which we saw Boko Haram take more than 200 children and kidnap them and sell them into sexual slavery and apparently and fearfully perhaps kill some of them. We don't know to this day where those girls are who were kidnapped by Boko Haram in Nigeria. We saw what happened with ISIS. We've seen the brutality of the emergence of ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. It has been one of the darker years, in many dark years I've covered since 9/11 and before. This year, it feels like things are coming undone, like the extremism has reached these new levels. I don't know exactly what it means. I don't think even the experts know exactly how to interpret it right now. One might want to hope that it's the death throes of extremism and maybe they get very brutal at the very end. I fear it's something different as the U.S. prepares to pull out, as Pakistan finally steps up against the Taliban and the U.S. begins to prepare for its withdrawal. I think we may see the Taliban push forward and be more violent than ever.
Well, all right, Charlie Sennett, as always, thanks for your insight.
Thank you, Emily.